Today we're here with Ms. Reva Puri, who's a psychoanalytic psychotherapist in India. Before I let you introduce yourself, just a word about what we're here to do, to talk about mother-daughter relationships in India. We're talking about young Indian women who walk into our clinics unable to have a sense of what is it that they want, and to do so we'll be drawing on psychoanalytic literature to understand maternal envy, cultural expectations around marriage, idealization of motherhood in India, and how that shapes our internal world. This conversation is especially for young therapists in India and also for people who have had mothers, are mothers, or daughters, or both.
And for mothers who are unable to understand the intense experiences and feelings they have towards their daughters, and they're not able to understand where it comes from or takes them over like a tide. So both the parties are deeply affected by something that they don't understand at the conscious level.
So let me hand it over to you.
I am Deva. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist. I love to write and I love coffee. I love to read. I am sincerely working towards building all other aspects of my life. I found psychoanalysis at a very young age in school, and this was actually my in towards psychoanalysis because the first thing that I wanted to understand deeper was my relationship with my mother, because it's informed who I am as a clinician. It informs my original fantasies about why I came into this field and what I thought I would get out of patient work. And through the years of my own analysis, I've become more conscious of the impact this has had on my life. And I think that is still a way that I introduce myself. Like, my relationship with my mother is so formative that I introduce myself through it, and my work also breathes into that relationship. And I have worked coincidentally with many women and not enough men, but most of my clinical experience has been with women, younger and older, and which has given me a good chance to dive into the inner world of what it means to be a daughter and what it means to be a mother. So it's been a very good, albeit intense experience.
What about mother-daughter relationship is particularly significant to understand in the Indian context?
I think there's many things, but the thing that I lay the most emphasis on is that how the mother identifies with the daughter is quite a complicated subject, because it differs through the lifespan of the child. The mother is able to hold close identification with the girl in infancy and in childhood, where even though the mother might feel envious of what the child gets to have simply out of being a child, being loved, being interacted with, being cradled with, being seen as a person, as all children are, they need specific kind of care. The mother is able to hold quite a loving identification with her baby. And this changes when the daughter becomes of marriageable age. And so there are analysts who have done this work, Sudhir Kakkar, for example, who speaks about how this identification till marriageable age is because the mother fully sees herself in her child. There is a complete mirror, and there is also an unconscious idea that this child will now go through the same torment that I have gone through in my marriage, through social pressures, through family pressures. And till the child is led to the sacrifice, to so to say, let me love the child, feed the child with exuberance and abundance, because I take it for granted that something bad is going to happen at some point. And I feel like the most important thing for me in my work with Indian women is that this is rapidly changing if we look at that minority of the urban context, where marriages don't necessarily have to look the same or be as bad as experiences, and there is more, with all its cons, there is a lot of nuclearization of the family unit. And suddenly the mother is faced with this shocking realization that my daughter's life will not look the same after her marriage. And that is when the envy and the shock pours in, and one wants to attack their child, one is deeply jealous, one wants to have the daughter's life. So what does the daughter make of these attacks? Because the daughter herself is unable to see her mother as anything but loving. because that's all that we can imagine a mother as, loving. The mother can only imagine herself as loving. We as a society don't like to be conscious, even though there's a lot of research, we don't like to be conscious of what postpartum depression looks like, what are images of wanting to be violent against your child, what all does a child simply through birth take from you, takes your body, takes your life, takes your preoccupation. But this hatred is something that we simply cannot be conscious of, because the woman who is conscious of her hatred towards this idealized function of childbirth is not recognized or valued in society. She's only recognized as long as she is loving and kind and maternal towards this baby. And so the child cannot see the hate. The child cannot see what has been unconsciously communicated. And so it creates deep confusions and splits in the child, that my mother seems to be doing all of this out of love, but where is the love? And why am I having all of this anger if she's doing what's best for me? So I think that break in identification is what interests me the most as a clinician, because that is when you finally see the difference between the mother and the baby.
Yeah, and that's how mother-daughter relationship can be inherently complicated, I think universally, but this is what makes it complicated in this way, specific to our context.
Absolutely.
And what makes it complicated, there are multiple layers to it, like you said. One is that the nature of this exuberance, the love that the mother feeds into her child, that's also a very specific kind of love. Love that also comes from a place of course, loving the daughter, but also preventing something from happening, which is if the daughter grows up to be a different kind of, or want to have a different kind of, maybe an idea of marriage or different kind of life for herself, that also threatens something in the mother.
Absolutely.
Mother's own ambivalence comes into picture, the hatred that you said, which is unconscious but is felt by the daughter, of course, also by the mother.
And I also think the word that you used is so important, because the mother feeds into the baby. It's almost like a program. It's like a specific programming is fed into the daughter. As long as you can be all of this, the love is ensured. As long as the daughter can enter an unconscious compromise with the mother enough that she can build herself in the shape that the mother can bear to allow in her mind, the love is ensured. And as soon as the independent thinking and being and her relationships take over and this programming gets threatened, that is when this whole mystery box kind of breaks and all the evil seems to seep out of it, the stuff that has been kept barricaded within the mother.
Yeah, which makes it a very precarious position for the daughter to be in. Either you choose love and compromise with the ways in which you can experience your own mind, or you have your own mind but risk losing mother's love.
Absolutely.
So this kind of conflict that the daughter can find herself in, how do you see that dynamic in clinic?
I think, of course, individual variations are always there. But I think there is a specific kind of very existential type of dread that takes over. I can see in the clinic kind of like an anxiety that doesn't make sense. For example, a patient was talking to me about her ideas of the future, what she wanted to do. And that included a departure from the subject that she had agreed at home to study. Let's take architecture, for example. Architecture was decided upon by everyone that this is going to be the best idea. And as soon as it came to an actual decision, she chose to go into animation, which is something that is much more creative to her. And it is something which was a very individual creativity based. It was not so much about the structure provided to her, but it's something where she was being absolutely creative and fluid and birthing her own characters. And she felt such a deep sense of dread when it used to come to producing these things. And her fixations used to be about the character should look perfect. The character should tell a very specific kind of a moral story, a right story. For example, the character should be someone who gets good marks, for someone for whom the conflicts in life were about marrying the right boy or getting good marks, and this character's journey towards doing all of these things. Yet the stories that would come inside her, and even in her dreams, would be, what does it feel for a character to be slapped? What does it feel for a character to endure family conflict? What does it feel for a character to suddenly take a journey or a travel to like a road that has been untraveled? So Theo is off wanting to venture into the unknown, challenging structure, actually focusing on the subject's experience of violence. These came up as the stories that she wanted to tell. And whenever it would come about discussing these, she would feel this deep sense of dread as though something is going to happen to her if she tells these stories. And when I would ask her to take me with her to her fantasies or what is it that could happen with her, she would not be able to localize it to me. It just felt as though she's going to lose something and she is going to not exist the same way that she has existed before. And after many conversations and diving into depth with this, it turns out that a lot of the voices in her head were her mother's, that this is the right way to be. I have raised you to be like this. Marry this kind of a person, to do this kind of a job with this much security. And when she would challenge these ideas, she would not feel the thrill of rebellion or the conscious fear that she will lose her mother's love. But instead, it felt much more primal, that something that she depends upon for survival will be lost if she tells these stories. And it feels that very primal, physical, somatic sense of anxiety connects with that kind of a pre-Oedipal relationship with the mother, where the unconscious compromise has been so early and so set in stone that the child's whole psyche, the only thing the psyche can do to continue to live is to enter into a negotiation with the mother's unconscious. If you can't bear me to be anything else, I'll make myself in the shape of you and the shape you ask for. Which also means that if I stop, I have no shape because I get my shape through you. And when I lose these things, I lose my sense of self because it's been built on that unconscious compromise that I've had with you. And so, though it feels so unrealized, so vague, so beyond language, because it feels like it has existed since before language. So that's one example that comes to my mind.
And listening to your example, I'm thinking of the ways in which it can show up in our clinic, such as patients who may have difficulty setting boundaries or take up space, because that also means experiencing your own mind. And experiencing your own mind can feel like a betrayal to the mother who you've entered into this unconscious negotiation with, where to have your own mind is to lose love. I also imagine patients who may find it very difficult to name specifically what is it that they want, their own desires, wishes, maybe having a good sense of what is the right thing to do as opposed to this feels like the right thing for me.
Yeah, and taking on from what you said, there is so much research about this right thing to do, which like authors like Shifaq and Amrita Narayanan talk about narcissism, a specific kind of a moral narcissism, where there is an attachment to your own image as being a do-gooder, as being empty of a self and ready to be filled and occupied by another person. Like, we have to see that beneath this is actually the wish for primary narcissism, is the wish to be recognized, is the wish to be loved, is the wish to be held, is the wish to be seen as, wow, you're so good and so great. So in that way it is selfish, like it is full of the self. However, the way it manifests is this kind of selflessness, where the self has nothing of its own and is always ready to be filled by another. And this is simply like the outer manifestation that is loved societally. So it's an indirect way through which women get recognition, and it's an indirect way through which women gain cultural capital. And when you are feeding this into the baby as a program, there is an assumption that you are carrying that my child, like me, will not be able to access any recognition directly. She will also have to resort to getting it indirectly. And I will prepare her to get it indirectly. And the threat comes in when the child challenges you and says that actually I can get it directly. And that's the moment where it all kind of breaks down.
Yeah, you mentioned that something that's fed into you culturally, because that's very important to understand in clinic, so as to not villainize the mother.
Yeah.
And hope for this kind of place to be there for our patients, where they can see that mother is also a product of the culture, where the culture has necessitated that kind of a split for the mother to be able to survive.
Absolutely. And it's important for me to think about how this kind of a mother who it's easy to villainize, patients and like me as a woman, when I think of my mother, think of mothers as extremely fragile. That seems to be the conscious imagination, that if I do something that is not been agreed upon, it'll break my mother, it'll hurt my mother, I will hurt my mother and she will not survive. And again, what becomes unnoticed is the power almost of this omnipresent mother. A mother who has had enough power to have that control over what the child can dream. Like, this is the sphere where the mother has been able to exercise that power because other spheres have been locked culturally. So this is the sphere where she can exercise something. So when we also look at her in that very one-dimensional view of helpless and fragile, we are unable to see the power and the hold and the wish to control the other. And if we cannot see the power in the mother, it is very difficult to help a patient reach that place of anger, to accept that they might be angry at this mother, because how can you be angry at something that is fragile? You are not angry at something that is fragile. You are angry at the control this fragility has had on you and how it's shaped your life. So I feel like the benefit is not just out of goodwill, that we want to not villainize the mother. When we see her as multifaceted, it unlocks the power in the patient to hold multiple emotions towards the mother, of love, of care, of compassion, of hate, of anger. And that's when something frees up and you become more able to have a vision of your life which is not identified with your mother.
This ambivalence also becomes very difficult to experience towards one's own child because of this Indian ideal mother archetype, which I think is experienced differently towards both the male child and a female child. Like, I imagine for a male child, this kind of concrete position where there's no ambivalence is experienced as maternal enthrallment, where the mother might want the male child to be preoccupied with her, because that also protects mother's position in the family, otherwise a precarious position. And for a daughter, it might be the maternal envy, where the mother may unconsciously stage the daughter to be very similar to her and not have her own separate desires that are only for herself and not in service of the other.
Yeah, I do think it's quite different, with the only same theme being that it must not be ambivalent. Where for the male child, the concept maternal enthrallment by Sudhir Kakkar, where the idea is that you wish that your baby remains preoccupied with you and dependent upon you. So there is a desire to not help the child into self-sufficiency, autonomy, to break that experience of omnipotence. Because as we know, the experience of omnipotence is one where the mother and the baby are very connected. The baby feels omnipotent because the mother is able to allow them to feel omnipotent. For example, always being at service of the child, food being provided at the instant that it's asked for, not wanting your male child to clean the house, to know how to clean the house, to know how to cook, where the child feels that anything can happen for them at the snap of a finger. But you are the thing that makes that functioning possible, which means that other relationships will find it difficult to enter that equation. It will mean that your child will also experience an internal helplessness about how to take care of themselves without you. And so they are also dependent on maintaining this relationship as primary. So this is how it would manifest with the male child. But do you have anything to add about that, about the male child? 'Cause I know you've worked with a lot more men than I have.
Yeah, like you said, taking from that also, I think in my experience of working with male patients, it's been not letting the child experience any kind of frustration, but it's not so much for the child, but wanting to ensure that you have some place in the family, in the society, which is otherwise a very precarious position for the mother, which also comes at the cost of maybe the child not being able to have an independent relationship with the father, because the child is preoccupied with the mother, with what the mother does for the child.
Absolutely, and I think that's so important that anything third is foreclosed, where you only form a relationship with your mother's husband and not your father.
But that kind of differentiation where my father might not be a great husband but can still be a great father, and that whole idea also fades into this ideal mother archetype. My mother who's perfect, takes care of me, loves me, and then the child also finds it difficult to then experience any kind of ambivalence towards the mother. That, for example, how can I hate my mother? How can I not dislike my father? He's done so and so to my mother. That way you're never able to have an independent relationship maybe with anyone who does not have a good relationship with your mother.
Absolutely. And, taking that to think about the girl, where this is never the issue. That the girl the omnipotence is broken earlier than it should be. Where the girl child does not think that you can desire and it will appear. That the world is at your control, where it's broken into the girl very early that life is going to be extremely limited. And you instead have to be the person who will make the thing appear when you are attuned to the people around you. How I think that this unconscious hatred and envy marks its appearance is when the mother attacks the omnipotence of the girl child, where the mother, for example, forces even very simple ideas such as cleanliness must be done for the other. The house must be kept clean for your father and your brother and your grandfather.
Yeah, like it's the right thing to do.
Yes.
And not so much what cleanliness does for you.
Yeah. What does a clean space mean to you, like a declutter? And it's posited as this thing that you are obligated and in duty to fulfill for another. So any kind of a personal relationship you could make with this is prohibited. And therein comes our main thesis, that elaboration of the self, because when the world is colored in you, is not allowed for the girl child. For example, even masturbation, which is an end in itself, it is simply for you, is not allowed. Anything that is for your pleasure only is not allowed. It must be with your husband post your marriage for reproduction. And so it's as though the space, like the literal, like Amrita Narayanan says it very well, that the space of the mind is not to be used and entered and made your own for the girl. It's to be made someone else's. And I find it extremely helpful that there is this analyst who gave this formulation of a paranoid nucleus and a cruel superego. She used this example in her work where she says that for the mother who is herself paranoid, any action of the child is seen as directed hate towards the mother. The example she uses is that a child breaks a mug or a vase, And the mother instantly is like, this child is crazy. The child has hurt me by breaking the mug. And so we see the paranoid nucleus at play here, that my child has harmed me, I don't love the child. So I was saying that if we apply that same example in the Indian context, where a girl child is playing on her own because she likes what she is playing with, blocks or whatever, she is trying to experiment in the kitchen because she likes something and wants to make it for her own self, are seen as attacks on the mother. They are colored in the paranoid position that the mother holds in her mind. And that is the operation of the paranoid nucleus. Like when you're in that paranoid schizoid position because of where you are culturally held, you're culturally held in a split. You are only recognized once you have split yourself into good and bad, where only the bad is recognized. So your life's work becomes about maintaining that split and gaining recognition out of that goodness, and that badness does not go anywhere. It just expresses itself indirectly with VVC tropes of the bad mother-in-law, the cruel mother-in-law, the
Evil Barbie.
yeah. All of these are simply because the woman is expected culturally to maintain the split. And when you are split and when you have an infant, you are a new mother no matter how many times you've had a child. For this baby, you are a new mother. For this baby, you're going through physical changes, you are going through difficulties with yourself. So obviously fragility and everything is heightened, vulnerability is heightened. So that split is perhaps even more raw. And so the mother will see this as an attack on yourself. And so the child feels evil for wanting to elaborate their subjectivity. Something that is simply a product of going on being, as Winnicott would call it, and doing, developing gradually from that being, is attacked because it's seen as an attack on the person you are dependent upon. And therein becomes what happens with the baby. Like the basic impact of this on the baby's psyche is that they adopt the paranoid nucleus of the mother. To keep the loving of the mother intact, they will eliminate activities which ensure an elaboration of the self, where you will not do things that simply you like. You will not develop a vocabulary of these are the tastes I like, these are the colors I like, these are the foods, these are the activities that I like to do. These things where you can touch the world in a color of you and expand that palette. The child starts attacking these things in their own selves, and this becomes a full inherited psychic mechanism that the baby carries. So this would be the transmission of that paranoid nucleus from one generation to another generation. And so I think most importantly is that we don't need continuous outside forces to make the person paranoid. It's transmitted intergenerationally like trauma, because that is how a baby learns to preserve love.
Yeah. And it's not just expected of the mother to keep that split intact, but that paranoid nucleus has to exist in order to ensure survival. Because as difficult as it is for the baby to have a mind of her own, but at the same time not losing mother's love, for the mother also it becomes very difficult to have her own subjectivity, ensure that the baby also has her own subjectivity without this fear that she's going to be culturally shamed or be called an overly permissive mother. When you said that's something that gets transmitted intergenerationally, I was also thinking about its beyond beta elements, because there's been no alpha function. I think paranoid nucleus, which is enforced by the culture, forecloses the possibility of alpha function to function, which means what the baby ends up inheriting is beta elements from the mother and then continue to process it, but also failing to, because there's been no alpha function.
Yeah, absolutely. We can say it's almost in the aura. It is not digested, it is not synthesized. That digestive tract doesn't exist for this kind of a hate because it would require some kind of symbolization, some kind of a capturing. And the whole system is based on denying that. It's because it's beta elements, and which is why with patients it shows up as sometimes only physical symptoms. I feel dread. I feel like there's pain in my stomach. I feel a dropping sensation in my heart. I feel like something is going to happen to me. Something is going to happen to me, but no image of what is that something. So it's very clear that the communication has been in unconscious terror, which has not been made sense of. And I think it's also very important for me to keep in my mind that if this paranoid nucleus does not keep transmitting from one generation to the next, then the system will become destabilized. Because then for women, the function will not be to be this empty container of the other. And not container in the psychoanalytic sense, but container as in literally full of the other without the self. And if that gets a break, then we have to look at basic order of our social relations falling and getting reconfigured. Which is in my mind why the father does not intervene much. The third also does not try to create a gap between the mother and the child, because it is also somewhere in service of that, keeping that world intact. And so when I read my own work, sometimes I wonder where is the father. But the answer that sometimes comes to me is that is he absent in the service of something? And then what is that in the service of? Which is possibly himself and the male child.
Yeah, and you're talking about fathers, especially given it's very common these days for children to not have fathers, or like single mothers or growing up with two mothers. I think the presence of the father is also in the mother's mind, being able to keep the third intact, which is mother's own subjectivity, mother's own life outside of being a mother. Mother also being able to express and experience her own desires and wishes and choices. That kind of experience for the child is very helpful. And in the traditional sense, this is what a father does for the mother and the baby. Introduces this thirdness. The absence of a third in the mother's mind that creates this two people universe becomes very difficult for the daughter to step out of without feeling like it would hurt my mother.
Absolutely. And I think that something that is crucial to note psychologically here is that there could be a world of third experiences. It could be that the mother is working. It could be that the father has a great job. It could be that the father does interact with the mother-baby unit or whatever. But it's also what the way in which these are viewed by the mother. For example, if the job or the work is just something to do, it is not connected with self-experience or enjoyment or elaboration, it can again take the tone of this moral narcissistic thing where I do not do any of this for me, which also implies only you are for me. Like that enjoyment and the pleasure link, when that is not owned, then you are also creating a situation where you are telling your baby in some ways that you are all I have, like you are my that one link to recognition and pleasure and whatever indirectly. Which is also why from so many male patients and female patients, I hear that when my parents are not doing anything for themselves, they start feeling guilty. And when you try to make a conscious connection here, it doesn't make any sense. But because unconsciously there is a pressure that now I have to be their lively object and induce pleasure, induce good feelings in them, because they have nothing of their own. And this pressure is immense. Like within the culture where we are not accepting of individual pleasures, the pressure is immense to be that pleasurable object for your parents or your mother.
Yeah, and I'm feeling like you're the only thing that can induce that kind of pleasure.
The magic doctor or something.
Yeah. So we've looked at paranoid nucleus, which was Minervo's concept for people who might be listening and are curious. But how do you bring this up in the clinic, this kind of theorization? How do you work with patients? Because I imagine that you can't name it as maternal envy with your patients.
Yeah, your mother is envious, so you can't do that. Yeah, honestly, I think a very gentle questioning approach works very well. For example, when my patient is telling me about some kind of an unrelenting remark the mother has made, when you get married, you will have to do these things. So why can't you just start now? Or why is this so important? You will not be allowed to do this after your marriage. When these kind of remarks are made, patients also get caught up in feeling that attack on themselves and feeling like, oh, something is being stripped away from me. And do I have to lose myself? And oh, it actually feels like I have lost myself because I find my body obeying my mother. For example, when the unconscious identification is so strong, the child might actually lose interest in the thing that the mother has told them not to do. Where the child will themselves feel like, oh, I lost interest in it. But it is a part of that unconscious communication, or even that conscious communication that the mother has made that this is not worth your time. So I find it very helpful to ask patients simply, what do you think was happening in your mother when she said that to you? What do you think made her say this? What do you think her logic is? How has her life been? Where do you think this comes from? Tell me a bit more about that. And the more cohesive the mother's story becomes in the child's mind, and we obviously know that with any act of psychoanalytic inquiry, what we are acquiring is not fact. It is kind of a co-created fiction. But it is what the unconscious communications have been made of. So the child might even dream something that the mother has not been able to dream or symbolize yet. So asking these questions creates the mother as a limited, fallible human person. And that in itself brings the result of, I don't need to physically go down to obeying. And so I have found that is the most helpful, to create the mother as a limited subject from this omnipotent fantasy of the mother, to create her as a limited subject with power and helplessness in the patient's mind, helps kind of free yourself of this prophecy of the mother.
Not just have mother's past in mind, but help create mother's history.
Absolutely. And the possibilities that the mother might have had at some point as an imagination for her future, which had to be left. What do you think? Maybe she wanted things. And so many times when I've asked patients that, so when did she stop? When do you think was the turning point for your mother? Patients often say she held that one job she liked and after that she left it and then her life was never the same, or she entered this relationship, or this happened after marriage. So there is somewhere an idea of this mother who was once alive, and also tapping into that can help the patient feel more okay with their aliveness.
And when the patient also sees that the therapist is able to take or just see these parts of me which are rageful, hateful, angry, then they can also have that kind of hope from the world that I can take up space, have the world see these parts of me and not break down. And it won't be a betrayal to the other.
And I think by inviting negative transference, asking things like, well, that must have made you really angry at me when I did that, like as a therapist. Or have you been feeling like I have not been seeing something? It becomes an invitation to stitch that part together, at least in that very kind of transient moment, which is still not the world, but it's not just your fantasy life and this person in the middle as your therapist. And you finally feel like you can air some part of you out, because Lynn Layton in her work talking about the divided subject talks a lot about how parts of us that will not receive recognition are parts that we split off and keep somewhere away. We only wish to develop those parts at our forefront that feel recognized and get recognition in our relationships. So it's almost as though as a therapist, I am trying to fan an undeveloped part. Like where there's like a small ember and like I'm trying to fan it and see if something will come. And because it's a thing they have kept away from oxygen for such a long time. This rage, the hatred, the reaction they have towards the mother's unconscious communications. And so it feels as though they are themselves examining this part of their inner world in front of you for the first time.
Yeah, and I think this is where it's very important to not interpret very quickly. This is what might be happening, because then you can also become this mother who's dictating it for the daughter what's to be done. So starting with curiosity and naming difficult feelings which need to be kept split.
Absolutely. As you're very rightly saying, that it would feed into this kind of a paranoid nucleus in some way, where the child would, maybe patient would again maybe want to create something in the image of you, and unconscious communications of your theoretical interests or what you want to see and happen for your patient, and identification with you as the authority, as the new mother.
Yeah, the perfect ideal mother to then becoming the perfect therapist.
Yeah. And how can I be that perfect baby / patient to you now? Can I make myself in your image? And so then when you don't lend that, you hold that back and you ask it, you're much more likely to encounter just a simple moment of thinking for themselves that they are doing in front of you. So that is something that I experience as very rewarding, and I've also felt my own internal world grow that way in my analysis, where a lot of interpretations of synthesis have not helped me as much as a simple acknowledgement of like where I am physically, like somatically. What are the kind of reactions I am having, be it disgust, be it anger. And it's helped me realize things that I felt towards my mother that I never thought I could feel, because even I grew up with this feeling of like, my mother is my best friend and we're teammates. So in my head, this hierarchy of mother and child first, and perhaps teammates, friends later, was not there. The beginning was teammates, peers. And it helped me think about my anger. It helped me give some room that I have for myself in my head. And that was immensely, immensely helpful for me. And because of that, I feel like it created space for me to look at the circumstances that my mom was in around the time of my birth and before that. And it makes me know what that early 4-5 years must have been like for me and for her. And how it's been helpful is that, like how the image that comes to me is that how children teach their parents to operate phones, touch screens and using the internet, because children have resources that parents did not have. So similarly, when I have the experience of relationships and a social structure, no matter how limited, that my parents didn't have, it almost becomes like an orientation, that when I am not operating out of this paranoid position of this unspoken agreement between me and my mother, I can actually question my mother and ask her, why don't you do things for yourself? Why does this have to not be there? When my analyst asks me, do you really think anything would change if you start doing the things that you wanted? Like, what will fall apart? To make me realize that as big as this unconscious compromise once was, it's not holding anything in place anymore. And so it makes me able to ask my mother, why not? Why not take the steps? Like, what do you think you will lose? And the most it can do is make it conscious to her. That why not? And so I feel like that is a way in which this work manifests, is because in India, the family structure is very different from how it is where psychoanalysis was originated, or in countries like the US, the UK, where the idea is that parents are with children till a certain age, 18, and then children go on and live their lives. And you are working with the internal representations that the children carry of their parents. And if you work through the internal representation, the child will be free and more agentic. Here, we are in constant relation with our parents till ages of 50 and 60, till we are alive, till they are alive. And so it's not a negotiation with your internal object. It is also a negotiation with the real other, the parent. And so I feel like real change in our context specifically is also seeing the relationship with the parent change, seeing the lines of questioning change. And I feel like that is where I see the impact of this kind of work.
So work of therapy is not complete capitulation to family harmony or radical individualization, but I think work of therapy would then be to create internal conditions for choosing. Yeah, because it's not just autonomy, like you said, that it's not just internal objects that we're working with. They're very real, alive objects.
Absolutely.
Who patients are maybe living with, talk to every day. So it's not just autonomy but relational autonomy, because selfhood is very embedded in these relationships. So the idea is not to extract selfhood from it but to work with it. It's not so much whether to stay at home or not to stay at home, but can I talk to my parent as myself?
So as a part of what you were saying, I think within the Asian culture, South Asian culture, there is also a desire to give what you get to your parents. Like you said very rightly, it's not extractive, that the individual autonomy has to be extracted and you have to flee with it. A lot of times there is an idea of going back to the motherland, like in this case going back to the mother with what you found when you left and wanting to deliver that to the mother. So we might be a bit reductive to see it as a savior fantasy, because there is also a very real feeling that if you can help your mother access her life, you can access yours too.
And that's also the real mourning, right? That's the paranoid position to be in when you say that I can't be anything else because my mother has not been able to be anything else but a mother. Being at a place where you feel like I want to share this with my mother. Like you could say to your mother, why don't you try this? What's the harm? Because that's a real ability or a capacity to keep the mother as a complex person who has been able to do some things, has not been able to do other things and would like to try. I think when you do that, you're also grieving for the first time, maybe in relation to your mother, be in that depressive position where you want to see what would it be like for my mother to have those things.
Exactly like that, with that newer capacity in you because of therapy, because of your current relationships, because of additional resources, that capacity that you have created to be able to bear that dread of what's the harm, because the harm is losing that unconscious compromise and the cost that comes with it, which is this differentiation from the mother. By asking the question, you are also expressing that you imagine your mother as someone who dreams or who could dream till a certain point. And you are inviting your mother and giving her that assurance in your question that I think you can survive the dread too. Like nothing is gonna happen to you, except that maybe you will reach a place where you have to mourn what you didn't have. And that I feel is the powerful moment relationally. And of course, this is a very rosy picture. There are a lot of relationships where this doesn't happen. So one has to develop that more open relationship with their subjectivity. For example, with my patient, if the mother is extremely embedded in this is the right way to do things and you only have to do this specific kind of a job, it must not be creative, like it must not involve you at the center in any way. And it turns out that when my patient would ask her mother what she wants to do, she would only say, I can't imagine that. I don't know, I can't imagine that. And the grief of this is that we have to entertain the possibility that she might not be able to imagine. The mother is still in relationships which require her to function this way. And despite that, the patient has to build their relationship with their subjectivity.
Yeah, which makes therapy not very rosy, because you see mother being limited in these ways and then talking about it, the ways in which you have felt limited because of that can evoke a lot of guilt, even anger towards the therapist, anger towards oneself for just feeling upset or having felt upset at some point.
And more than anger towards the self, there is a kind of a dread and there is a kind of a repenting, like for that life that could have been. So there is a begrudging idea that I could have had a fuller life. and I don't want to imagine my mother as the one who kept me from that fuller life. And so I imagine it instead of an anger, almost like a pleading that don't take this away from me or don't do this to me, which the patient might be bringing into all their relationships to keep that primary object intact. And I also imagine that it might even translate with the father. When the father tries to intervene or the father tries to create a gap, where the idea is that almost like a don't rip me from my mother, and even though I might need it at this moment, and the therapist becomes that person. So I agree with you on that a lot, that there is that kind of an undefined anger towards the therapist for threatening to evoke something which has been agreed to be kept aside for a very, very long time. And I think an example that really stayed with me was in Amrita Narayanan's book, where she talks about how her patient was lazing around on a holiday and the mother is anxiously prepping for guests that are to come, and the child enters into the kitchen and the mother is pouring down instructions, do this and clean this and do that and all of this. And the patient is in a daze that, I was relaxing and now this is being fed on. The patient says something like, just chill for a second, and the mother slaps the child. And the patient is just in a daze and starts crying. And there was Amrita's analysis that there was a deep, deep envy of the room that the patient had in her mind, where she could relax. Her body was like physiologically in a relaxed state. She brought that relaxed state to the kitchen. And the question that reverberated in Amrita's mind was, who are these guests? Are these some uncles, some patriarchs? And this reverie that she very beautifully captured in that piece was about just how this paranoid nucleus functions and how the mother is feeling the space in her daughter's mind is an attack on the mother.
Yeah, it's like the mother wagged this part out of the child, which is her own unintegrated part, which can want things for herself and want to say this to herself that I can chill a bit.
Yes. Look, it's hold my horse here, calm down. And we see that physiologically the daughter is put into the state of the mother. You whack her, she's crying, she's in an aroused, excited state now. And again, that empty, lazy, nothing flooding my body state is beaten out.
Yeah, which is what Narayanan has called blank white spaces.
Yes.
Nothing is in place of desire and wish, but only dread.
And I'm also thinking of patients who come to therapy to get rid of the bad stuff. Rid of crying, rid of feeling like this, rid of these relationships where they don't get the recognition they want. They want being unconscious, but they don't get recognition is what they're conscious of. Asking them questions about, okay, so what do you want, does not elicit a response, very surprisingly. It's more about, can you please be concerned with the matter at hand and help me get rid of this stuff? And what they are roping us in to see is, they can only imagine an elimination of the bad at max. They cannot imagine moving towards anything good. So you are in touch with something that feels that dreaming is not possible. And so much of that is bearing that anger of that patient about how it never seemed possible that I could have something good. And I feel like that's also a part of this specific kind of a paranoid nucleus with limited dreaming that shows up in the clinic in young Indian women.
And one of the ways in which I've also seen that the patient has this kind of a demand that I need to work on this and can you just focus on helping me through it, but at the same time not having the sense of what is it that you would like to have instead. So work of therapy is also to do the dreaming function for the patient, dream of the possibilities that they can have,
and have that be flexible.
Yeah.
And have that be just internal for a while.
Yeah. And have that be ever changing and dynamic.
And encouraging the patient to challenge it when you do share something with them.
Because when they challenge it, that's their own mind coming into the picture.
Yes.
Something that they would not like to have, or something about what you said did not resonate with them.
Yes.
Which means that there is a mind.
And I think this thing that you brought up is very important about the feeling right, where that link with your own body is broken. Like when I hear my analyst say something that feels right to me, it's a experience of my whole body which agrees. Where I'm like, ah, yes. And my body is like, this is what I've been doing. And it's a link that is broken because so much of what you force the girl into doing is not for themselves and it will not feel right. And instead of that, you place that kind of a moral voice of right thing to do. And it's as though with enough engagement with how does this feel in your internal world, that link is born again, where it's like, oh, I don't feel this is right to me. And I feel like that is so important that it's almost like intuition speaking.
And that's also very important because this desire, choice, wish that we've been talking about is also experienced through body. Maybe things such as even the ways you would like to be touched. So coming into being, feeling like this feels right for me is also now some kind of connection is being established with the body again.
Yes.
Which had to be broken.
Yes.
Because one is not to be in touch with their desires or wishes.
Yes, after that very early experience of your infantile sexuality, your relational recognition, like in simple things like malish, या बच्चे को कैसे पकड़ना है, because this feels good to the child. These links get broken when it becomes about the right thing to do versus how does it feel. And it's almost like reaccessing that level of communication with yourself.
This whole idea of marriage also. One is that, ye mat karo because you won't be able to follow this through after your marriage or you won't be allowed to. But that idea starts to set in much sooner than that, which involves the body. Like things such as don't eat this, don't wear this, don't express yourself in these ways. Don't express yourself through your body like that. Don't move around like that.
Don't sit like that, don't stand like that. And you give this voice a prime place in your body, that when you again start experimenting, you feel like you are doing something wrong. And then it takes a while for it to feel like it's not something wrong, it's just something different, almost like you're eating a new food and you're registering that sensation. Is it slippery? Is it slimy? Is it creamy? What is it? And so like that kind of an experimentation is the goal, I feel, and which is where the analyst cannot have an authoritative idea of what will they like, but the hope is to reach to a place of experimentation.
This also makes me think of, this would be my question to you as well, this kind of disconnection that happens with the body, or not being able to take up space, or the thread that comes with feeling autonomous or having a sense of your own mind. We've been talking about all these experiences in the context of mother-daughter relationship, but how do you know in the clinic that this is where it's coming from? That it's not a result of any other kind of dynamic?
Well, two things come to my mind. That it's not any other dynamic, because it's as though there are many dynamics where this is the foreground, like where maybe the father is not intervening because this is the dynamic, so it's also about the father, where perhaps the grandmother and the other caretakers have also implied the same unconscious condition onto the child. So it's many dynamics, of course, all at once. But I think for me, the question is, what do I feel in the room? Do I feel like I am an imposing presence? Am I in the presence of another voice which I can't see, which I'm talking to, pleading against? Is there some kind of the Hindi word like karta dharta comes to my mind, where like the all-doer and the all-knower? Am I in the presence of some force which seems so powerful and omnipresent that I can't speak to my patient right now? This force is standing strongly in the middle. So that's usually when I think of the mother, and it could be wrong. It comes from the dialogue with the patient, what is the voice coming to your mind and all of that. But more often than not, it will be some kind of a voice that has that archetype of that idealized maternal object, if not the mother herself.
think one line of questioning that has helped me is not only being curious about who this patient is, but what this patient has not allowed to become. That line of questioning has helped. And I found that patients who have had some kind of unconscious conflict with the maternal archetype, they can present complaints such as chronic indecisiveness, paralysis in terms of making a decision or taking the step, some conflict with female authority figures, not being able to name what they want, some kind of thread that comes up when one's own desires and wishes become apparent or come up in therapy.
Yeah. And I think that point is so important because as a younger therapist, I'm still so new at this, but as a younger therapist, I would get caught up in the content and in the material. As what is the decision that you're not able to make? What is the moment before you feel paralyzed? And thinking that it's in the circumstance that I will find the conflict, I will find the internal unconscious conflict. And realizing as time went on and I continued to work, it's the story they are telling me by telling me they are paralyzed. And the question became not what about, but what does this paralysis give you? When you don't move, what do you achieve? And you achieve the union with the mother, and you risk separation when you move, no matter where it is. You fuck up, you win. Either you like it, you don't like it. Even in both those options, what you lose is the camaraderie with the mother. And so then it becomes about addressing that, because my mistake would be that, oh, they're not able to perhaps assess that life is limited, so the reality testing is impaired, that there will be losses. But we're not talking about losses, we're talking about that one big loss, which would be with the relationship with the mother, with that negotiated compromise. Because if they get it or if they fail, it's about them. They are in the foreground and not the mother. So I find that quite helpful to look at those symptoms connected with the conflict with that maternal archetype. And again, with the female authority, what happens if I love them? Or what are the dreads that come into my body if I think differently, if I don't just submit? And do I want a special kind of closeness? Do I want something more intimate physically, mentally than what I could ever have with my mother? I find that very helpful.
Yeah, and what do I hope this female authority figure to see in me?
Yes, absolutely.